Hello. Welcome to the latest video in my Introduction to Programming series. In this video, we're going to talk about GitHub. Now, before we get into GitHub, how to use it, and what it's all about, I just want to make a quick disclaimer that I am not a GitHub expert, and the way that I'm going to teach it is based on how I use GitHub with really just me and my friends. I've never really worked on a community project. I've never worked on a large team with GitHub, but I have created repositories for myself and for, two to three other people to work with at a time. So if you're looking to work with GitHub on a low level for maybe yourself and maybe a couple friends, then this video is going to be great. Now, if you're looking for like how a company should use it, or a large team or a community should be working in GitHub, I'm not well versed in that, so this is not the video for that. But if you're just looking for personal use with GitHub, this video will be for you. So what is GitHub? I know that when I was starting programming, I kind of heard the term GitHub before. Maybe I saw a GitHub link every once in a while, but I really didn't know what it was, until I really, obviously dove into it. So GitHub is a version control system. It's a centralized version control system. So all that means is there's a system in place to monitor, track, and keep a project organized over a period of time with multiple people working on that same project. The term centralized means that there's one central location. You can see in this little diagram that's going to be the server repository. So your project is going to live on a server in a centralized location, and all the people who are working on it are going to be able to pull the code down, work on the code, and commit that code, their changes or their new features, to the central location for all other workers to then see those updates, right? So if workstation 1 made a change and they put it up to the server, the next time workstation 2 pulls the code down, pulls the repository down, they're going to see workstation 1's changes or their modifications. It's a little bit more complicated than that, but we'll get into that. So the whole purpose is to keep your code safe over a period of time when working with multiple people. Now, so you don't get lost as we jump into working with Git on the command line and the GUI interface, I wanted to outline a few terms so that you have a baseline understanding of what we're talking about. Now, the first term is repo or repository. This is a version controlled project. You just saw in the last diagram that there's a central repository, and then all the workstations have a copy of that central repository or project. So that's just the term for a project in GitHub, is a repo or a repository. Clone or cloning a repo is downloading a whole entire repo. So that's going to be one of the first steps, is to clone your repo, and it's going to pull down the entire project for you to work locally on your computer or wherever you're calling the clone. Pull is like clone, but you call this when you want to update your local project folder with the updated files, changes, etc. from the repo community. So cloning is the first step when you want to set up your Git environment on your local computer, and pull is when you already have a local environment set up, a local version of the repository. Pull will simply update the local project from the central repository. Push is the opposite of pull. So when you push your repository, you're actually pushing your local code up to the central repository. This is a little bit more complicated than that. You're going to push to either a fork, you're going to push to a branch, or you'll push to main, which is not recommended, but pushing is pushing the code up to the centralized repository. A branch, which I just mentioned, is an isolated version of the project. Branches are very important as they allow a developer to work on the project, implement their ideas, and share them without the fear of breaking the overall project. So making a branch of your project is so key to the concept of GitHub. It is really the main thing, in my opinion, making a branch, making an isolated workspace, copy of the repository, working in that branch, and then pushing up to the repository uh, branch. You'll see. Again, I keep saying all these things. I don't want to go in depth and kind of confuse you, but we'll see it in a moment. Branches are really cool things. Merging is when a break off, a branch or a forked code is added to the master, the main repo. So once you push your branch, then you and your team will review the code. And if the code is ready to be pulled into the main centralized repository, you'll then merge your project with main. So those are just a few of the terms. Now let's get into them and see how they're used. So this is GitHub. This is my profile page. I'm not sure if this is what you would see if you looked me up or what, but this is my profile page. Got a little simple README thing, some repositories that I've worked on, your contributions. This is kind of a cool thing. The more you upload, the more you'll see these little green tiles. You can see there's been a little period. I had a son in between this time, so I've had a little bit of a break, but I'm slowly getting back to work, you can see. So the profile is pretty cool. Now the main thing is these repositories, these projects that we've been working on. There's a few ways to get there. You can simply click on this repositories button. You can drop this down. You can say your repositories. So I'm just going to click on this button, and I'm going to quickly show one of the repositories that I've been working on. This one, ABC. So this is a website for a comic book that my buddy Riley and I are working on. This is actually the project that he's going to be working on once he learns how to do GitHub. And I just wanted to kind of show what it looks like from the GUI interface. You've got your code, you've got issues, so people can make comments on this and say, hey, I tried to run your code and it didn't work here, maybe try to fix it or something. Requests, so if someone says, hey, this would be a cool feature, let's put something up, they can make comments here. And there's just other little things that I don't necessarily work with too much. You've got security, so this is I believe private. Yeah, you can see it's up here. This is a private repo. I don't really mess with any of this stuff. I just make it private when I first make my repository, which you'll see in a moment. There's a few settings you can do. We're actually going to be adding a developer on here. So if someone wants to work on this project, I come into here, and this is where I add them. Also, if you wanted to delete a repository, you can come down to the danger zone within the settings. But for us, we're not going to be deleting or working with any of that stuff in this video. Just wanted to show you there's a lot of options for diving even further than in this video that I should definitely take some time to jump into. But for now, we have our project. So this is the repository I've been working on. And these are all the files and folders and directories that I have for my project. So it's a web page, it's got some templates, it's using Python and Flask, which is a web development framework for Python, which is pretty cool, which I've been kind of picking up a little bit and really enjoy using it so far. There's like an overall README file. So when you come to this main page, I've got this kind of set up with, what I want to do with the project for now, but it could definitely have notes on how to set up, what machines it works on, how to configure your machine to run the project efficiently or at all. That's kind of where what I see the README files as is, hey, if you're coming to this repository, here's the rules, here's how to push, here's how to set up your project. But yeah, so these are all the project files that I have. There's this called main. We'll see here in a branches in a little bit, that there'll be, if there's another branch, there would be like branch 2 and Carter's branch, or whoever's branch, and you can click on them and it will show you where they look different compared to this main branch. Okay, so if there was multiple branches, you would see that here. And you would also be able to see the changes in the code over time. Okay, we're gonna see that when we create our new repository right now, but this is what a repository looks like. You can people can watch it. I'm currently watching it, it's my repository, but other people can kind of like subscribe to it and like see the progress if they're not necessarily working on it, or if they are working on it, you can kind of like think of this as like bookmarking. This is actually like bookmarking right here, star like favoriting. And forks, you can create a fork, which is a completely separate project, which is a clone of this current project right here. So we're not going to get into that stuff though. One cool thing that I like down here is the languages. It will show you what is the breakup or the breakdown of your project. So you can see 61% HTML, 28% CSS, and almost 10% Python. Okay. The last thing I want to touch on before we break into actually creating our own repository is this green clone button. Okay. This is the important button for when you are sharing your repository with other developers or your friends or whatever. You click this button and you've got a couple different options. You can SSH, you can GitHub command line interface, or you can use the HTTPS. This is the one we're going to use, but you actually copy this URL right here, and then you paste it into your command line interface, and you clone. This is how you clone your project. You say git clone, and then you add this URL, and it's going to download the whole entire code. So this code, we can clone this repository with this URL. We're going to see that here in just a second. Just kidding. One last thing. I'm just as I'm going through, I'm thinking about other things. One of the really cool things about GitHub is the because we have the version control. One of the biggest things that I've noticed in Python and in other programming languages is the ability to use someone else's code and have it work properly on your machine. So one of the cool things about having GitHub is that I can upload my pip file and my pip.lock file, which are my they're kind of like my internal project control package managers. Go to my older, I think one of my first videos, actually I think it is my first video, where I talk about what is pip env. What's cool about this is I can create my project on my local computer, install a bunch of packages, store them in my pip file, and then push them to my GitHub repository. So when my other developers and my friends pull down my code, they can run pip env, and it's going to use this local pip file, and then they can install all the packages needed to run the project efficiently. So it's a really cool way to ensure that whoever else is working on your project is using the same tool set as you, so you don't get messed up somewhere down the line just because some packages were outdated and this person was using this module and this person was using this version of the module. So that's probably one of the coolest things, is having pip file and having a package manager so that everyone can be on the same page, not only in terms of the history of your code, but also in terms of the tools that are being used for your code. There are a few different ways that you can actually make a repository in GitHub. You can do it from the command line interface, or you can do it from the GUI. I enjoy doing it from the GUI. I don't know why, it's just my preference. So go to repositories, and only one person in your team is going to need to make the repositories, and that person is going to be the owner of the repository. They're going to have the permissions to add users, remove users, make it private, do the settings and stuff. So whoever makes the repository is in charge of all the configurations. The button you want to press is within repositories in your profile, and it's this new button. Okay, so this is creating a new repository. You have to give it a name, and the name has to be unique. So we'll say repo test. Okay, so repo test is available. Description, say this is a test repository there will So we're only going to be working with text files. I don't like to add code when teaching about GitHub because it kind of adds another layer of complexity to it. So we're just going to be working with text files. I'm going to make it private so that no one else can see it. That's just what I prefer when adding repositories, because it's not necessarily community based, it's just something that I'm working on usually. And I like to add a README file, which will set up my project fully. And a README file is just a file we saw when we were looking at the other repository. It's a file that should inform other users and developers and people viewing your repository on procedures, how to work with the code, how to download the code, how to upload new pull requests, you know what I mean? So things like that go inside of a README file. And then I just press this create repository button and we're good to go. So you can see I have my test repo. This is my .readme file. It's the only file within my project. And now I'm going to take this URL, right? Same URL we've been looking at, https github.com username and then repository name. Okay, so I'm going to copy that. So a second ago, I was trying to clone the repository from the command line tools, and I ran into this issue. And there was an update with GitHub actually 2 days ago. Today is August 15th, and on August 13th, 2021, GitHub changed their the way that you can log in to GitHub from the command line tool. So I'm actually going to show you the way that it usually works. I'm going to copy this and I'm going to go in here, and you would use the Git Clone Tool. So Git Clone, and I assume this is still the correct way. It's just a matter of logging into your GitHub account now. So you're going to see, I'm going to put in my information because it was asking me for my information. Oh, actually, I just put it in wrong, so it's going to tell me, so hold on, give me a second. So let me retry that. I typed my password incorrectly. And it's going to tell me that support for password authentication was removed on August 13th, so I have to figure out how to change it. And actually this blog post right here is brought me to here, and then I have to get a personal access token. So if we read here, it says please use a personal access token instead. So I'm like, okay, well, how do I do that? I found this link and I came here, and I already have Brew installed. So you can follow all this stuff and read up on it. I'm still kind of figuring out, this is actually the first time I'm doing it on my own. So I'm going to follow this. We're going to try this. Brew tap Microsoft Git. Let's see what happens. I'm not sure what's going to happen, if it's going to make me restart something, update, but we'll just give it a second, see what happens. Because after I tap this this brew package, I'm going to install Git Credential Manager Core. So it looks like they have a whole new tool set up for you to manage your passwords and all of your credentials and things. So I might have to stop this video at some point if I have to put in my password or something like that, but I'll make sure to follow along as much as I can. Okay, so look what happened here. We got a lot of stuff. All right, so I'm going to go ahead, and I copied brew install cask git credential manager core, and I'm now pasting it in my terminal, and I'm pressing enter, and we're going to see what happens. Okay, so it seems like everything got installed properly. I didn't get any sort of errors. I did have to put my password in, but the video was just taking a little bit of time. So if you keep reading through this article about the the personal access token. At the end, it says the next time you choose to clone an HTTPS URL that takes authentication, Git will prompt you to log in using a browser window. So it's moving to a O2 auth, login version. So we're going to go and we're going to try that. Back in the terminal, we're going to try to clone. So git clone and then the URL for our repository. Let's see if this works now. Okay, cloning into repo test, and it looks like it's going to bring me, okay, this is interesting. Sign in with your browser or token, personal access token. I don't have one of those. So we're gonna go sign in with my browser. I'm already signed in, so it should just allow, okay, so it's asking me for access to some repositories and things. I'm going to allow it, and if I get hacked, then I got hacked. So it says you may now close this tab and return to the authentication. I just got an email from GitHub. I got the notification on my phone. Let's go back in here. Oh, look at that. So our repository has been downloaded. Let's just do a quick ls to take a look. And we've got repo test. I'm going to go into repo test, and I'm going to do an ls.la. And again, the only file we have in here is this readme.md. That was the file that we created when we made the repo. And now we have this .git, which is going to store all of the configuration files for our Git project. If we take a look, you've got a few different things that we're not really going to get into because little complicated, and we just had to get through that little roadblock. So I'm going to put links to those description or to those blogs so that you can also kind of read up on that. That was a unique change for me as I was filming this video. I was trying to clone and I was, recording myself, and I just kept hitting this error, this 403 error. And I said, oh no, that's not good. So glad we found a solution. Glad I got onto my repository and able to clone once again. Now that we have the repository cloned, I'm actually going to go and open up PyCharm because that's, again, I'm talking about my workflow, and I usually work in PyCharm, so I just kind of want to show what it looks like to work in PyCharm. I'm going to go to open, and it's going to pull up my file explorer, and I'm going to be in my documents, and then I've got my test repo, and from there I'm just going to click open, and it's probably going to throw up an error and be like, hey, what interpreter do you want to use? And we should be able to tell it to use the pip env, the virtual environment interpreter. So again, you got all these things. Python 3.9 has been configured for your project. Let's say configure your interpreter. Let's go to interpreter settings. Let's take a look. User local bin 3.9. That's my pip env interpreter. So it automatically does it for me. Thank you very much. And let's hit OK. The first thing that we want to do is we want to talk about those branches. Okay, so branches again are isolated copies of the project that are for you, a single developer, or maybe a sub team on the developer team to work on a feature, and from there that code gets remerged with the main. So we're in PyCharm. I just set up the Python environment. That's for if you're working in Python and stuff. I'm just again showing people who are going to be working in my configured environment, how I like to do it so that it it flows well and there's no issues. But again, we're just going to be working with text documents here. So the first thing you can do is you can see the different branches by doing Git Branch, and you can see the only branch I have right now is main. And that's the branch that was made when we made the repository. And I don't want to work in main. You never want to work inside of main, because if you push to main, then without checking, without having anyone check or making a pull request, you could be pushing your code and your modifications to the main repository that everyone else on your team is pulling down to. So working on main is definitely a no-go. It is not something you want to do. What you want to do is you want to make a new branch by specifying Git Branch, and then whatever you type is going to be the branch name. I like to do name dash feature or whatever I'm working on. So I would do Carter dash, and let's say first text. Let's just do that. Okay, that's kind of a wordy branch, but that's okay. So I'm going to hit that, and now I'm going to run that same Git Branch file or a command again, and you can see we're still in main. The one that's highlighted in green is the one we're in, but we now have this new branch, which is Carter's first test. And I am going to move to that with the checkout command. So git checkout, and we'll say Carter first test. Okay, hit enter and switch to branch Carter first test. And one more time, we can look at the Git branch. And now Carter first test is the branch that we're working in, and we have our main branch as well. So I'm going to clear my screen, and now let's actually do some work in our project. I'm just going to do it inside of here, inside of the PyCharm interface. I could obviously touch command and make a new file, but it's a little better if we do it here just for demonstration. So I'm going to do new file, and I'm going to say first test.txt. So I've got first test.txt, and PyCharm is awesome, so it's going to see that this is a repository, that there's a .git file. If we look here, oh, I can't click anything, but it's going to ask me if I want to add the following files to Git. If you want to do that, you can click add, and it will automatically add the files to be tracked, which is again something we're going to see here in a moment. I'm going to click cancel because I want to show how to do it from the terminal. But once you see how it's done from the terminal, you're more than welcome to click add, and it will automatically add that file to the track. So I'm going to cancel this because the next thing that I wanted to show, sorry, I keep moving this and it's going up. Let's just add some random stuff. I'm going to say to do, I'm going to say make we're going to merge. That's what we're going to see throughout the rest of this video. And okay, so we added some kind of filler text. I saved it. Now there's something called staging. Okay, so when we stage our files and things, that's kind of getting our files ready to be pushed up to the main repository or our branch repository. So when something is staged, it's being tracked by your GitHub configuration, and GitHub knows about that file and says this file is going to be put within our next push to origin. And I can check what files are being tracked in the staging process by doing git status. Hopefully I typed that right. And you can see untracked files, this .idea that's from the PyCharm actually, and the first underscore test.txt. Okay, and those are the files that are being that aren't being tracked. They're new modifications, new files that were created. Anything that has changed since the last pull from origin, the last time you pulled code or your project from the central repository, any changes or files you made are going to highlight in red, whether it's a new file that is created or a modification to a file. This .idea / folder or directory is a directory that I really don't want to be pushed to my my branch or the main, because those are kind of personal configurations from the PyCharm setup. So there's a way to not have every single file be tracked, and that's by creating a git ignore file. So I'm going to do touch .git ignore, And that is just a text file, which if I come in here, you can see I've got here. All I need to do is add the name of this file to here, and I'm going to save this. Now when I go to git status again, you're going to see I've got my git ignore in my first test.txt. No, the git configuration is going to read the git ignore file, and it's going to say, oh, well, inside of git ignore is this .idea directory. That is a directory that we don't want to add to the push or the staging or anything like that. So that's kind of helpful, is to add your personal files. Sometimes I'll put like personal notes in a git ignore, but git ignore is a way for you to tell the git configuration, hey, these files are not associated with the actual project that I'm working on. They're just configuration or whatever. So make a git ignore and you can put all your personal files in there. And again, if I do git status, you can see now that it's no longer tracking the .idea directory. So just like that notification said, when we created the file, it asked us if we wanted to add the file to the tracking, and that's what we're going to do from the command line. I'm going to say git add dot, which is going to add, the dot is going to collect all the files being tracked, git add dot. And if I run git status again, you're going to see that the changes to be committed are a new file called .gitignore and a new file called firsttest.txt. Okay, so that is what that's how we add them. Now they are staged; they're ready to be committed, which brings us to our next stage in the workflow, which is committing the changes that we've made. A commit is just a markable point where you want to save your progress in your project. Just because you commit something doesn't mean that anyone else can see it at that moment, because our code is still living only locally on our computer. So when you commit something, you're really just creating a checkpoint for, if maybe you said you worked for 3 hours and you do a commit, that's just saying, okay, everything that I've done, let's make sure that that stuff is saved and being tracked by GitHub. That doesn't necessarily mean that anyone else is going to see it. So the verbiage in the command for that is going to be git commit, and if you do -m, you can add a message. So we'll say made git ignore, just like a little, made a git ignore and a test file. Okay, so that's our little message that's going to kind of get tacked onto our commit, our checkpoint. So if we look at the history, we can read that little message and it will give us a little bit more information on what just happened in that commit. So I'm going to clear this out. Now if I go back to the git status, my branch Carter first test is up to date. So everything that was being tracked is now committed into the process. We're ready to actually push it up to the central repository, at least the branch for our central repository. If I take a moment to go back to the web, the command line, or not the command line interface, the web browser version of our repository, you can see one branch. Remember, we were looking at that earlier. We only have the main branch, which is our default branch. Now, when I go ahead and I push this code up to this centralized repository, we're going to have two branches all of a sudden. You're going to see that Carter first test branch. So let's go ahead and do that now. Let's say git push origin, and I'm going to put Carter first test. Okay, so we're going to push our code to origin. This is pointing to our central repository, and this is the branch that we're going to push to. So when I hit enter, we're going to see blah, 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 blah. Everything's done. Looks good. Okay, so you can read over these. This is just kind of a report on what has just happened. And if I go to our GitHub page, you can see Carter's first test has recently pushed less than a minute ago. So let's compare and pull request. We're not going to do that at the moment. I'm going to check out the branches. Let's see. Here we go. Now I had just had to reload the page. So you can see we've got the main and Carter's first test. If I go to Carter's first test, it's got the .gitignore and the first test.txt. If I go to main, it just has that readme file. So if I actually go to this compare and pull request, the GitHub is going to check the code and make sure that there's no overlapping code in places, or some things that need to get checked between people. This is the more important part right here. We're going to be pushing our Carter first test into main. Again, able to do that. We've got a name. This is that little tagline that we did, the little message that we did. And I could write more detailed stuff about what I was doing or why I was doing it or how it works, whatever it is. The one thing that I want to talk about is if you have a team, if you're not doing this by yourself, you can add reviewers or assign things to other people. The reviewers is really the main thing if you're working on a small team. If you're the only one working on that branch and you are doing you've pushed your code to the branch and now you're ready to merge it into the master, what I like to do is I like to assign this to another developer. Currently, I don't have any developers on the team, on this repository, but if I have another developer, I would type it. So I've got my friend Riley, right? So I would type in, Riley's username, whatever his username is, and I would hit a reviewer, and that would mean that this code could not be merged into main until he signs off on it. Basically, he will look at the code, look at the changes that have been made, and if they really is no conflict further than what GitHub automatically checks, then from there, he can merge it in. So I could actually create pull request, and if I do that, then it's going to automatically push it into main. So I'm going to hit create pull request. And it's going to bring up this little conversation tab. This is actually where if there was a reviewer or this was assigned to somebody, people on the team could kind of chat back and forth about it. But we don't have that. So we're ready to merge the branch into main. So I can hit this merge pull request and I'm going to confirm the merge. And pull request successfully merged and closed. And we can delete this branch now because there's no need for the branch, right? Because the feature is done. We created our first test. And if we go back to code, you can see we've got one branch again, and we're in the main, and now we have our gitignore and our first test.txt. So that's kind of the workflow, right? We created a branch, we made some changes, we tracked those changes locally, and then we pushed our changes to the central repository. We got confirmation from our team that those changes worked, and we merged it back into main. So now if myself or another developer was to pull down this code, they would be ready to be working on the most updated version of the project. A few final cleanup things, a couple things that I want to mention. So we've already kind of covered the workflow, but then there's also, keeping your project environment clean and making sure that everything works right. So if I do git branch again, you're going to see that Carter first test is still exists locally for me. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to pull origin. Actually, I'm going to move to git check. I'm going to check out main. and then, I still have my branch, but now I'm going to pull my code down from the main repository. Actually, look what happens when I change to main. You can see that we have the MD, right? Those changes from my branch to branch have not been updated yet. So if I go back to Carter first test, we still haven't pulled the code from the repository. So on my local machine, Carter first test still has not been merged with the main branch. So I'm going to do that right now. I'm going to move back to main. And again, we're going to go back to here. And I'm going to clear my terminal out so you get a little bit better visuals. And I'm going to do git pull origin. Okay. Actually, first, before I do that, if we look at git remote -v, I couldn't tell you what the word remote means, but it shows me where my origin is, right? So origin is just essentially a variable name that points to my URL. Okay, so when I say git pull origin, it's basically saying for this project where I'm at, use the git tool. We're gonna pull down the code from origin. Okay, so I can all this stuff is set up. That's gonna be the next thing I talk about, but I'm gonna clear this one more time. So if I say git pull origin, boom, look what's happening. It's showing me what's happened. We've done git ignore, one line, and first test.txt, 8 lines, 2 files have changed. And yeah, now if I go git branch, you can see Carter first branch is still there. Back in here, we've already deleted it, but since this is local, it doesn't delete it. But I can do git branch -d and then Carter first test, deleted branch, boom. And if I check out my branches again, I just have my main. So now my local machine represents the central repository, the most updated repository. And if we check, we're in main, we are in the main branch, and we have all the updated things. So that's getting your machine kind of ready for the next phase. Once you've made a branch, worked on a feature, pushed it up to the repository, merged it, that's how you kind of clean your machine to be ready for the next iteration. The next thing I want to show real quick is about forks, where the other developer is asked to make a fork of the actual project. And so all that would really happen is if I make a fork, I can't fork, but because I'm the owner, so I would have to be in a different account to make a fork. But if I made another fork, basically what would happen is I would get another, so I'm going to copy this, right? I would get another URL link to the other repository. It would have this other username, and then the same repo_test, right? It wouldn't be CASH96 repo test. It would be John/repo test. So if that user wanted to push their code, they would have origin, so git remote v, right? We have origin, which points to, this would be the master repository. And then I would have, I would want to update my fork. I would say git remote, I think it's add, and then I could say John, and then I would place this. But what I would do, let's just pretend again that that's the repository URL. Okay, so I would hit enter, and now if I do git remote -v, I've got origin and John. So what would happen in this scenario is, as John would work on his project, instead of pushing his branch and for his pull request to origin, he would push it to John. So he would say git push John and then the branch name, and then it would push the code to his branch. And then basically the same process of reviewing, assigning, and merging the code would take place. But this way, that stuff is happening separated from the main branch. But again, that's just something that I wanted to kind of point out, that it's not necessarily part of the workflow that I was describing previously, but it is something you can do. So if you want to keep your main repository super clean and only have merge, pull requests and things like that, you can have everybody on your team make a separate fork, and that way they can work on that, and then everybody pulls it into the master once they're ready. So this was a lot of information. I bet this is a pretty long video for, kind of a short topic. I know I like to, dive into things and take a lot of time talking about them. I noticed that my if else video is like an hour long, but that's okay. These videos are just for me and anyone who wants to watch them. So if you've made it this far, thank you for watching. If not, screw you, but you won't hear that. So hopefully this made sense, and this video helped out and you have a better understanding of GitHub, not only for working in an environment that I've been kind of setting up, but also for yourself. Maybe I've kind of demystified things and played with them. Hopefully you followed along with the video and you were able to get everything that I was doing. Something that you should think about is, don't be afraid to break your machine. There's always a way to reconfigure it back. If you mess with this origin, or you mess with the branches and you make a branch and all of a sudden you can't find your branch, and you feel like your project's all messed up, guess what? If you haven't made a super sophisticated repository, it's totally cool to mess up. And even if you do mess up, you can just re-pull the code from the central repository. So that's what's awesome about GitHub, is it keeps your code safe. It gives you the flexibility to test and be creative and try new things without having to fear that you're really going to break your project and make a lot of people mad. So locally you can pull down the project and do whatever you want with it. It's just a matter of the proper way to push that code back up to the central repository is what, that's where the hard rules apply. But once the code is down in your project, you can break it, delete files, modify things left and right, doesn't matter. Just as make sure that you don't take those modified broken things and push them to the main branch of the master repository. Okay, but once again, thank you so much for watching this video. Hopefully it helped, and I will see you next time.